the way in which it has unfolded seems quite a dangerous spiral, right? No signs of any imminent ceasefire or any possibilities of the cessation of hostilities. Just read this morning that the Israeli Prime Minister is trying to play the peacemaker. Made a visit to Putin, and then from there he went and met Chancellor of Germany. So we've not heard about it. I'm not sure what is going to be the de-escalation option for Putin, which can be seen as where he could also claim victory, and even the West can also say that they were able to quote unquote stop the expansionist designs of Putin. So I think this gets getting really messier and deadlier. I think initially they were quite mindful of the fact that they didn't want to really inflict huge civilian casualties. So the military strategy seems to be a little careful and calibrated in terms of not actively trying to provoke the Ukrainian population. But I think that kind of lend itself to a very concerted propaganda by the Western media, academia, that Russia is facing a serious setback and basically they failed in the military objective and all that. But I think last 2-3 days you've seen a shift in the Russian strategy where they've been a little more, they've been relentlessly pounding some of these key Ukrainian cities. So I really don't see what is going to be the end game, end game, at least in the short term, right? It is bound to get worse before maybe it can get better. Any solution to end this conflict without potentially recognizing Russia's influence in the neighborhood and some kind of scaling down of NATO ambition, I see it very difficult how we could find a solution with it. And Putin also, to some extent, it's a single-party authoritarian state, right? So, say if it's a very noisy, polarized democracy, there is a certain public opinion element, domestic public opinion, which plays out, right? And the leader needs to be mindful of the public opinion and calibrate positions. But in Russia, I think Putin has the luxury of pursuing his vision or militarist vision to its logical end, right? He's also emboldened by his previous experiences where the annexation of Crimea, except for some sanctions which were mere pinpricks, he was able to ride over it. Right? This time, of course, we need to be mindful of the fact that the Western countries, EU, US-led alliances, much more punitive sanctions, which, even if you could sympathize with or, kind of see a point of view in what Putin is pursuing, I think this level of coordinated sanctions that the West and, the larger West has imposed on Russia, I think is going to be certainly cause serious economic pain to Russia. Though Russia has kind of gamed scenarios since 2014 to build that internal endurance to withstand any of these potential sanctions. Russia is like a military superpower, but its economic clout is slightly limited, right? So I don't know its ability to kind of withstand this level of sanctions that West has done, especially in a very concerted, coordinated way. And I think the economic impact is what is going to be quiet when we just thought that, COVID is behind us and then, the next 2 years, country can focus on the growth that was lost over the last 2-3 years across the world. This is unfolding, and I think this has a serious potential to disrupt the global economic system. And this kind of an inflection point where a lot of countries might look at the option where this kind of order, quote unquote, which the prevalent world order might collapse, and we might move to a much more multilateral, regional power-centric kind of a model, right? And a lot of countries might even come to a conclusion that this might not be a bad thing, though it could mean a certain disruption, right? For instance, if you really look at the food prices, right? Between Russia and Ukraine, they control 30% of the exports of wheat, actually, especially countries like Egypt and Turkey, right? They don't have food security like India. For instance, India is not a very big exporter, but they do have a huge domestic wheat production, right, as a part of our food security plan. But Turkey and Egypt, they spend exorbitant sums to import wheat from Russia and Ukraine, and some of the ports, the grain ports Especially in Ukraine, I think it's completely. I don't see any export activity ever happening in anytime soon. Russia does have, just because of the sheer geographic expanse of Russia, I think they do have certain ports from which they can still send grain produce and all that. But again, the shipping companies are also, even private shipping companies. I mean, other than almost all the big oil is withdrawing their investment. Some of it, I think, is virtue signaling, but some of them are okay writing off their investment in Russia. Food, I think the food security of some of these countries, if they get impaired, what are going to be the domestic political consequences for those countries, right? And of course the entire energy issue, which you also alluded that you had a detailed discussion. Like still the kind of dependence that Europe has, and they even consciously built it over the last decade as well. How that is going to play out in terms of the global energy prices. Actually, I mean, I think oil is still okay. I think, like, but in terms of the gas, right? I think like the kind of stranglehold that Russia has over Europe. I mean, I don't think so. There is any short-term mitigation measures. Like you can't say a US or a Qatar can't really step in and kind of provide that, meet the demand in the short term, at least. Like, and especially the Germany's own energy strategy of denuclearizing, and of course coal is not even in the mix. Embrace of the green energy is like a medium to long term project, right? Actually, so like, and the gas supplies are all built through pipelines. Like they don't even have sufficient LNG terminals in Germany. Like in fact, I just read that they are now accelerating the development of two LNG projects which were put on the back burner due to environmental regulatory rules and all. And suddenly they've woken up and trying to build that infrastructure. So there is nothing like where they can get away from Russian reliance in the short term, at least on the gas market. Actually, so the implications, and of course for India, I think the military hardware dependence, is very stark. So longer the war is going to go, I think it's going to be very bad for the world economy.